right now, as Congress in America debates how to handle the mess unfolding in Syria, reports now of new conventional fighting there are coming out. Plus, new details today on last month's chemical weapons attacks as to whether or not the fingerprints of the Assad regime are on them. We'll have that for you tonight. And next, from the House Foreign Affairs Committee to RFL, New York Congressman Gregory Meeks tells us why he is a no vote right now on force in Syria, but why he still might change his mind and what it would take to make that no into a yes. And later, even with Congress debating back and forth, the commander-in-chief is still named Obama. So what happens if Congress says no on Syria? Will the president still pull the trigger anyway? And what might the reaction be from D.C. if he does so? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. As you can tell, a whole lot of questions tonight that we'll get into. I'm Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us on a busy Thursday evening, September 5th. All right, let's get right to the debate over Syria. As I said, a busy day on a whole number of fronts. And let's begin with the latest news. And I want to bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, for that.
And Rich, President Obama is in Russia tonight at the G20 Economic Summit. And he did meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but not for long. This was about it. About 15 seconds in public, shaking hands for the camera. The subject of Syria did not come up, at least as we know. Yesterday, though, President Obama said he'd try to encourage and engage his Russian counterpart.
I think that international action would be much more effective, and ultimately we can end deaths much more rapidly if Russia takes a different approach to these problems.
The G20 providing President Obama with an opportunity with the world's leaders of the largest economies in one room. There is a chance to lobby for support on Syria, and today the president again pushed for action.
The use of chemical weapons in Syria is not only a tragedy, but also a violation of international law that must be addressed.
Meanwhile, back at home, lawmakers are getting classified briefings from intelligence agencies as the White House continues to press the very large group of undecided and reluctant lawmakers. Here's the schedule as we know it. The full Congress returns to D.C. Monday with full votes in the House and the Senate that could come as early as Wednesday. This just as a Russian delegation comes to town asking lawmakers to stop any U.S. action in Syria. Meanwhile, new developments within Syria itself. British military scientists reporting they found traces of sarin gas in the clothing and soil of attack victims near Damascus. This, the most specific details thus far about last month's attack that killed more than 1,400 Syrians. And new video of new fighting inside Syria today. These images taken by an anti-Assad news network showing Syrian military forces engaging al-Qaeda-linked rebels in a Christian village in western Syria. There are also reports of fighting near Damascus itself. Also in Syria, UN relief and aid workers say the plight is worsening for refugees and residents. Top humanitarian from the UN meeting with the Red Crescent, the Muslim equivalent of the Red Cross, seeking access to portions of the country cut off by fighting. And finally, calls for peace in Syria from Pope Francis, the pontiff calling for a day of fasting and prayer Saturday for peace in Syria and the rest of the world. Rich?
All right, Andrew, thank you. Now, as Andrew mentioned, they're busy in Washington right now. Lawmakers in D.C. getting briefings and asking a whole lot more questions about Syria today. But I got to tell you, as we approach you here tonight, what looked like it was clear sailing for the president maybe as early as Tuesday of this week when Republican leadership and Democratic leadership said they'd support the strikes. Now that support seems to be ebbing in a big way. It looks more and more likely it will be an uphill battle for this White House to get congressional support. Now, among those leaning against a strike, none other than New York Congressman Gregory Meeks, a longtime Obama supporter, and this again, a congressman who sees a whole lot of reports on Syria we don't have access to, sitting in the position as he does on the House Foreign Relations Committee. Now, I spoke with the congressman today. This is our conversation. As we sit here this Thursday, do you still stand undecided on whether or not to authorize use of force in Syria?
Absolutely. I still have a lot of work to do, and the administration still has a lot of work to do.
I heard your exchange with Secretary Kerry, and the key point that you said is, I want this thing to be multilateral. You want a lot of other countries that we don't go it alone, but put a little specificity to that. If the international community condemns Syria, when the evidence comes out here and it's to everybody's satisfaction, but we go alone militarily, is that enough of the world rallying behind the U.S., or do they need to also have skin in the game militarily for it to be okay for you?
Well, I think they have to be able to utilize their assets. Some of it might be militarily, some of it might be accessed through their skies or, taking off or landing. So I think that there need to be a combination of things. For me, it is very similar to what took place in Libya. Everybody had a role. Everybody knew what role which country was going to play. I think that's important for an international response.
I know you pushed Secretary Kerry on this, but I want to give his rationale to you, and then you tell me why you think it still falls short of getting a yes vote to you. He said, in terms of why, he says it matters to our security, it matters deeply to the credibility and the future interests of the United States of America, and it's directly related to our credibility and whether the country still believes the United States when it says something. If you believe this president that no boots will go on the ground and these are strictly tactical strikes, if you take him at his word, why isn't that enough of a rationale to say yes?
Well, I look at both our long-term as well as our short-term strategies. Now, the short term would say we can do whatever we want unilaterally. That generally puts us in a position where we're isolated. The long-term strategy says that if we do things on a multilateral basis, then it puts everybody else on notice that the world will act if someone violates, as in this case, the chemical convention. For example, North Korea could walk away saying, well, if we violated the usage of weapons of mass destruction or utilizing chemical weapons, then they know that the international community won't act, just the United States. I think that says the wrong message, and it gives the international community, shows that they're weak. I think that what we're doing is we're leading. We're leading and saying that we're willing to stand up to make sure that the use of chemical weapons are not utilized. And the president now is in Russia talking to members of the G20, and I hope that he's able to convince a number of them to come along, and so that the world, the international community, is standing up and saying we're not going to allow the usage of chemical weapons.
Let me play devil's advocate, though. Let's say the world all condemns Syria, but they don't go along to your satisfaction, and then nothing happens. Will we have let Assad get away with murder, and more specifically, cross a red line that everybody agrees, including Congress, was unacceptable when it comes to chemical weapons?
Look, I think that ultimately, that's a hypothetical question, but ultimately, I think that what has to happen here, because when you start talking about loss of lives, we need to resolve the crises in Syria. And everyone has said that the crisis in Syria is going to have to be resolved diplomatically. It's not going to be resolved militarily. So there's got to be another track with this conversation on with Russia and others so that we can make sure that we save the hundreds of thousands of lives that are being lost there and the millions of individuals who are being displaced and becoming refugees. So there's a lot of work to be done here, and there's not any easy answers. That being said, that's why I know I need to have some classified conversations and meetings with members of the administration. Because if I saw, or if the information indicated that the Assad regime was either going to attack or utilize chemical weapons, especially toward any of our allies, that's a game changer for me. I don't think that you need to have any kind of international coalition or anything of that nature if our allies are directly threatened, or if there's a fact that, and I believe that we're having intelligence that it seems as though that Assad would utilize chemical weapons again. I think that we're watching it, and therefore we could act then also, as we did with Libya when we thought that Gaddafi was going to go after some of his own individuals. So I think that we have a mechanism and a means to get it done and to make sure that people are not gassed again, and that and we're watching that very closely in a matter as we have in the past.
You are pretty good at counting votes here, and you're a senior member of the Foreign Relations Committee. What's your sense in the House on both sides of the aisle? Does the president have the votes if the vote were today?
I think it's pretty close. If it's the vote today, probably not as the votes were today. But I think the president has time to work on them. That's why there is a classified hearing today, and I think one tomorrow. I know there's a few on Monday. There's work to be done, and the results of what takes place at the G20. I think that the UN inspectors, by the time that a vote is close, they would have come back with some information. So if the vote was today, I think it'll be very, very close. I don't think that he may have it today, but they have time to operate.
Finally, and the president reinforced his point yesterday, He's asking for authorization of Congress, but he says he doesn't need it. War Powers Act lets him act unilaterally if he wants to. If he doesn't get the votes out of Congress and he attacks anyway, what would your reaction be the following morning?
Well, you know what? I think that the president did the right thing by coming to Congress and trying to get our consent. That's the appropriate thing to do. I think that's constitutionally what he has to do. I think that constitutionally, depending upon, by the War Powers Act, if it's a duration that's short, he may very well have that power, as he did in Libya. And so the president has to do then what the president thinks he has to do. But I have to do what I think is the right thing for the constituents that I represent in the 5th Congressional District of New York, as well as what I think is overall best for the United States. He's asking for our consent and, our viewpoints, and I'm going to give it to him.
All right. You just heard there from the congressman, and like many here, conflicted with seemingly moving benchmarks about what would or wouldn't justify attacks by the United States. So what to do about Syria is one of those questions, as we said, that you can't just put into a box of Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal. There's no party or simple ideology that compartmentalizes all of this, and it's something each lawmaker has to decide for him or herself. So tonight, we picked the brain of somebody who this isn't a theoretical question for, has had to make these kind of votes before many times over his distinguished career. We'll talk to Congressman Chris Shays about this, as well as the balance of our panel. They'll all come in here. Conversation straight ahead.